Thanks for joining us at Right On Replicas, where we're proud to bring you the best scale model kit reviews on the planet.
Review covers the 1970 Plymouth Duster Funny Car. It's a 1/24 scale kit from Revell, number 4528. Now, originally released by Monogram as the Tom Daniel designed cop-out funny car, this kit attests to its popularity because it's been re-released over a dozen times in various versions, including Mongoose kits, as well as this fresh new 2023 offering as the Flashpoint Funny Car. Molded in 100 pieces of white and clear styrene with chrome-plated parts and vinyl tires. The rear slicks are massive wrinkled and weighted tires that really set the model off. Now, also included is a beautiful new water slide decal sheet featuring the Flashpoint side script and the requisite flames. Another big help is the expanded 12-page instruction sheet, making assembly a little bit easier. Now, the molds were designed back in the early 70s, and with the technology of the day, there's a few quirks that we'll address so that you won't have any trouble with the assembly. But the mold and kit's parts are in great shape, and when you're done, you'll be proud to put this in your collection. Final dimensions for the kit are 8.5 inches long, 3¼ inches wide, and 2.5 inches high, or the raised height of 4¼ inches. Here are the parts for the kit, and as you can see, it's fairly basic, but it's got a full engine, a simplified 426 Hemi, and you can do some detailing to enhance it, but overall, this was meant for kids back then as a kind of a fun kit. So if you're going for contest perfection, you'll probably want to make some changes. But as it is, you can make a great looking kit right out of the box, just as you see here. Now, please pay attention to the sprue connections. Some of them are a little heavy, and you'll find that where they are connected to the chrome parts, you'll probably need to kind of finish those off with some sand sticks and retouch them up with chrome pen or something like that. And the parts themselves, they have some heavy sprue attachments. You'll need to cut them off a little from the part and then file them smooth to the edge. Please remember to use the safety and use guidelines from the manufacturers for any of the products that you see or hear used in the review. Here are the decals for the kit, and as you can see, they're pretty exciting graphics here. The register is good, the colors are great and opaque, and they've also paid homage to some of the kit's roots here. You can see the Venice, California Fire Department, which is where Revell started, and also there's some Monogram script there that you can add to the kit. Now, you'll find that the larger Flashpoint side script there will probably need a little setting solution if you want it to conform to the, I'll call them minimal door panel lines, because this is a funny car. It shouldn't have door panels at all. Construction starts with the body for my builds because they need to be painted and then dried out before you can really work with them. And also, if you don't get the body right, well, then the rest of the model is, going to be put into something that's not exactly what you want. So I start with that, and you see the sides here have been indicated in some black marker where the parting lines are. Those will need to be sanded off and smoothed over. I painted the interior with some Revving red, and that's a tester's color that, to me, approximated a metallic-looking fire chief's car. So a light coat on the inside. Basically, the inside of funny cars were either rough and painted gray or black, but when they went on the show circuit, they gave them a little color, and that's what I'm going to do here with this kit. You'll also find script work inside the body shell and on a lot of other parts, actually. You'll find them on a lot of different versions. Kits made their marks on these parts. After 3 nice wet coats to give it some good color depth, I set this aside to dry. The fuel tanks come in 2 halves, and they are split right down the middle. And yes, you're going to get a seam when you glue these together. Now, it shows them being attached to this cross member and then placed into the frame, but we're going to keep the fuel tanks out to touch those up and add those later. Now we'll get these pieces out to start the frame construction, and actually the chrome piece you see there, it's kind of just the darkest piece. We'll be adding that much later so that there's access to the underside if needed. So get the two halves of the tube chassis here along with the firewall, and in I guess an effort to make this most realistic to the original, they kind of built this around the frame parts, the body parts, so to speak. And so you have to slide this piece in there underneath the main rail section there, and then tape it into position against a couple of vertical posts, and then construct the rest of the frame. You can't glue it into place because if you do, you won't have enough room to install the engine later on. Now work on something flat so that you keep the everything true, and you see the engine support there with the red lines. Start with that, glue that into position, and then you see the one with the black lines there. That's actually the front support which holds those fuel tanks. Now you see the part here, the big X there with the green markings on it. That crossbar goes into position, and you'll also notice there's no paint on this. I find it important to get as much strength as you can out of your frame construction by building it before you put paint on it. And now we'll add that solid front frame piece in the front there, you see, and there's a couple of receivers and posts that go in towards the lower part of that, and then it just butts up against the ends of the frames there. Use some strong glue, some super glue, to put that in place. Now you can see that the firewall's been released from its tape bondage, and it's laid back, and that's the position that you'll want that in when you install the engine. But we're going to put the floorboard on next by flipping the unit over and gluing that into place and the receivers that are made for it. We'll move to the back here, and the rear crossbars go into place. They're the blue lines, and then you see on the frame that's where the receiver holes are for those. Start with the one closest to the middle of the frame, and then add those two to the back end with some strong super glue. With the frame pretty much roughed out there, we can start on the engine, and these parts will go into the top end. This is the blower unit and its mount. And so here you see the basic motor pieces, including the chrome valve covers. Now you see that part in the upper left. Don't take that off the sprue just yet. You see there, marked with some black lines, a little piece looks like a broken ejector pin. Don't snip that off. That's actually the mount for your distributor. I wanted to add a little realism to the motor since it's exposed when the on the body of the funny car is up. And so I drilled out the distributor to accept some wires. I used some gold colored beading wire to make the spark plug wires, and the gold kind of complements the gold and red theme for the rest of the vehicle. With the frame completed, I went ahead and sprayed that gold metallic to fit in with the color scheme of the model as well, and including the roll cage over the driver, and set that aside to dry. I glued the engine block together, and because it has some seams in it, I decided to use a little glazing compound and smooth that out later to have a nice flat finish as the motor is exposed. I used some of the Molotov chrome paint and from the refill bottle, and painted the repairs that I had done to the fuel tanks, and added the fuel caps on top, and you can glue those then onto the double crossbar mounts up front. I used a pin vise and a bit to drill some appropriate sized holes in the Hemi valve cover head there to accept the spark plug wires. You can see here also that I've scraped the chrome from the mating surfaces on both the heads on top and the valve covers. You have to remove the chrome plating or it won't stick very well. Then go ahead and assemble those, and you can see the distributor has been put into place on the head there on that mounting post too. Now you may have noticed earlier when we showed the picture that there's a blower hat, a regular bug catcher on the box art. But that's not what the instructions show, and in fact, all the parts for that are not in the kit. So you'll be disappointed if you're looking for that, or you can do something else to just kind of jimmy it together and throw the blower hat on top of the ejector stacks. But you can see here, it's pictured right on the box art. It's even on the side bar that the builder made for the display model for the side art. So I just assembled the unit with the injector stacks and the butterfly flaps in the horizontal, just as it comes in the kit. And like I said, you can either resource that for a blower hat. You see here the butterfly openings are painted red, as per the suggestions, and the engine has been wired, and a little black grommet around each entry point there for the spark plug wires, just like a regular Hemi. And now scrape the paint off of the areas where you're going to glue the engine into place. Now the front pin that goes into the engine support there, it just kind of nestles into that area. I used some epoxy to make sure that these pieces stayed in place. And then at the back, the plate for the transmission just kind of sits on the floor pan there. So you can just scratch some of the paint off there and glue that into position. Make sure that it is level and standing straight up and pointed straight back towards the middle of the frame. Also note that the firewall has been tilted backward, as the suggested instructions say, and then you can put the engine mount into there, transmission first, and then just place the front into position in the engine mount. Now you can move it forward and glue it into position on the crossbars, the vertical crossbars of the frame. After the motor has thoroughly dried, including a secure mount for the front portion of the engine there with some good strong glue, you can go ahead and warm up the belt, the drive belt for the blower, and install that. It simply goes over the harmonic balancer, the engine mount there at the bottom, and then around the inside of the tensioner, and then up to the blower unit itself, and that provides your blower belt, and it fits perfectly, and with when you warm it up, it stretches just a little bit and should stay in position when it cools off. I painted the coil springs here in the rears, suspension parts black, and then after that dries, you can just rub off the highlighted areas, the spring itself, and then it makes for a more realistic spring looking unit. The rear axle housing gets the chrome housing end piece placed in there and glued after it was painted gloss black and dried. And then the drive shaft is a steel color, and after those pieces had dried, we'll gather those to install that rear suspension. Now I'm showing you here where these suspension pieces are mounted to the frame. The red arrow is the uppermost part where the top of the spring butts up against the side of the frame, and you just glue that with some super glue after attaching the lower portion there with the receiver and the hole in the ends of that frame. You just glue those into position after you've scraped off all the chrome and paint from those areas. The mounting holes in the suspension pieces are like a D hole there, but I didn't see how they really worked that well. Simply put the suspension together with some slow setting glue, and then we'll put it into the unit. Like I said, you'll use some super glue for the suspension rods in the frame, join there. And you see the red circle there towards the left lower section. That's where the axles will snap into those little C-clip areas at the back of the frame on the bottom. And you want to scratch some of the paint off of those mating surfaces and glue it into position and make sure they are seated fully. Next, we'll install the rear bulkhead. That gets slid in where the red arrow shows in that triangle, and then glued forward against the bottom of the floorboard. And now that we've completed section 8 and the instructions, we're going to go to section 8. There is no section 9, just two section 8. So we're going to stage the brake pedal and the supporting lever there, and we're going to glue those into place as cross members of the frame. You see the brake pedal on the left is just hanging down there between the engine and the tank that was installed. That's a pressure tank, so-called, and the instructions have you paint it red. Here you see the overall, and we're going to install the transmission cover right there. Now that you see it's fully installed there, you are supposed to add the shift lever, which is part 51. I looked all over the chrome trees twice for it. It's not chrome. It's one of the actual parts off of the styrene tree. But we're going to add the steering wheel here, the column, which comes with its own crossbar and then glues to the front forward section of the transmission cover. You see the steering wheel is red. That's what the instructions showed, so I went with that. The fire extinguisher there is on the right of that. And next we'll work on the driver's seat. I used a ultra fine point Sharpie here to outline the seat belts that are on there, so that you can get very close to those without actually painting them, and kept those silver for a marker to color in later on. I used a chrome pen, the 1mm version, to highlight the buckles. At this point, you'll install the Watts linkage. Now, that's the zigzag piece, but the instructions aren't real clear. The ends of that are installed into locating points on the frame, little holes and receivers for the ends. But the center of that is supposed to be attached to the rear end. Now, the Watts linkage keeps the rear end centered under the car, despite the body moving up and down. The outside portions of the seat back and the bottom there were painted aluminum like the rest of the cockpit, and then glued together. Flat back black was used for the seating area, the cushioning, and then glued into position on the frame. You see here the pieces that are used to construct the front end suspension, and the coil springs, of course, blacked out as well here. But we're going to have to make a little diversion here to put the wheels together so that we can use them to mock up the front end to make sure that all four wheels touch at the same time. Now, here are your tires, and I know that this kit was at the time aimed for youngsters and just as a fun kit, but these are hard to put together. I stuffed the rear tires with some damp tissue paper to give them some body, and then they're also wrinkled in the wrong direction, at least on one side. But anyway, they still look pretty cool. They got some great decals for the sidewall script, and so we'll put those together. Front tires are non-scripted, non-branded, but they're a little wide for funny cars, but they still look pretty cool. The wheel halves themselves, though, need to be shaved down a little bit on the inside, so that the wheels fit together, so that the tire beads will touch the rims. And on top of it, these tires are solid, and there's an inner rim in there that prevents the wheels from going into contact with each other. So I had to, you see at the bottom a notch cut out there, I had to cut that rim out so that the wheels would fit together. There are left and right halves for the rear tires, and to assemble them, there's an upright ridge that's extended, like on the left side here, that goes into a groove, a recessed groove on the right ones. Now I use super glue to glue those tires together, and then you do the best you can, but you're still going to get a big seam right down the center of the tread. So I stuffed the tires with some wet tissue paper, like I mentioned, to give them some body after I had glued them together. And then, after that, you can go ahead and add your wheels, and you can glue those together and then just push them through and then seat them into position. So you've got a pretty good substantial assembly there. And then you can glue those wheels to the beads, and then use some rough sandpaper to try and eliminate as much of that seam as you can. It'll never actually all go away, but once you've got it together and you add your decals to it, which by the way you'll need some setting solution to get them to settle around the raised letters that are on the tire, or you'd have to cut them off. They actually work out pretty nicely. Okay, now back to our front end here. We're going to go ahead and assemble the axle and springs to the front end and the frame portion there. The top of the springs just butt up against those buttons that are sticking out of the top there. They don't actually penetrate very much into the coil spring mounts. And then the bottoms got some recessed holes and receivers, and glue those into position with some super glue, but give yourself a few seconds to mount your tires on there and wheels to make sure that everything is straight and true, and all four tires touch, so that you've got a good base. Now remember, this is just a mock-up. The wheels are just placed there. They're not glued into position. Now we're going to add the front sway bar there. One part goes to a pin on the axle on the right side, and the other to the back, the front portion of the cross member there. You can see it's kind of at an angle there. Just glue that into position. Next we install the radius rods here and scrape that chrome off where they're glued together. They go onto the axles, and there's just a little half round section where they butt up against the front axle, and then there's two posts at the back that are glued into those two holes in the frame there on the side of the rails. You can see the radius rods in place here just in front of the engine block and onto the front axle from the side view. Now you may have noticed we've added the frame bottom here, that big chrome piece that we left off earlier, because now we need it to mount the steering linkage onto, and so that gets glued on there minus the chrome plating, and then we're going to put that into position here. Now you see it's connected to a pin on the axle on the left side, and then the arrow in the middle there just over the frame plate shows where it fits into a boss that's just sitting there. It kind of is a general place where you would put something, so I use some epoxy glue to glue that into position. Now the front sway bar fits behind the front frame and then extends out and fits onto some pins on the axle. And we're going to take the drag link you see here and slip that over the shaft that's protruding out of the side of the frame from the steering unit, and then the other end towards the front fits onto the steering linkage that's protruding from the frame. You're probably wondering why I didn't put the instrument cluster on the steering wheel when I was supposed to. That's because I forgot. I had taken it off to paint the the gauges, and so now I'm just going to cut a little slot out of the bottom and snap it in place onto the steering column. And so you see it in place here just ahead of the red steering wheel, in position on the column. Now we're going to add the roll cage over the driver's seat there, and the two posts in the back fit into those slots just behind the driver's seat off of that top plate, and then the front ones just kind of rest on the frame. Use a couple dots of super glue to glue those into position. Scrape the spindles clean for the axles, and then also take some of the chrome off of the interface there, and use some super glue to glue your wheels into position. Make sure that they're straight and true and are all still touching. I used an ultrafine point Sharpie to start the trim around the windows. Now, most of the windows are held in by rubber gaskets on funny cars, and so I painted all these with Sharpies and the black variety. Now we get back to the body where the front end gets some silver paint. That's your regular 1246 silver paint, and taped it off there so I'd got a nice sharp line. And then I added some black wash after the paint had dried, and the headlights are chrome paint, and I use a little amber paint on the turn signals. Now it's time to decal the model, and well, you see the ones that are missing there. Those were the tire script for the slicks. And the rest of them, I took some liberties with a few of these, and I didn't use them all exactly. And you'll see, I used that gold band that's used to separate colors for a two-tone to banner the fire department logo up top. I also didn't use the turn signal ones, and I repurposed those for the front marker lights on the side of the fenders. So you can do a number of things. I chose the gold duster emblem for the rear, but when you put those big side script decals into place, be sure to make sure you have a lot of water on the surface of the car so that you can position them. Otherwise they start to roll and flip and they will stick. So use plenty of water before you actually put the decal to the body, and then shift it into position, smooth it out, make sure there's no water trapped or bubbles underneath it, and then you should use some setting solution if you want it to kind of hug those door panels. The light bar is kind of a production all its own. The clear part for the flasher domes was painted internally with a little stoplight red, transparent. And then the flashers, emergency flashers, were painted orange with amber, clear amber. And then all the parts that were on the bar needed to have the chrome scraped away so you could glue them into position. The large siren, however, it only has a little flat near the back end of it. I just scraped that clean, flattened out the center post there, and glued it in position. Okay, now we're going to skip step 18 because there's no step 18. It's just completely gone. So at 19, we're going to paint the cockpit shroud aluminum and set that aside to dry. Once it's dry, we can add the 426 script there alongside of the scoop tunnel and scrape off the paint for where we're going to mount that to the body. With the body decals dry, we can go ahead and give it a good coat of clear spray. Now I just used the Tester's wet look, and after that had dried, we can install the windows into position. I just used the connecting bands here and glued them into the roof. They fit perfectly, and just make sure that they stay there until the glue is dry. Then we'll add that shroud. It goes on to the tabs and the receivers up front. They go into those little tiny slots in the front of it. You glue that into position with some epoxy, and you're good to go. It's time to add the chute packs to the back end, and as you can see, they were painted black with some red bands and a little chrome buckle in the middle. Plus there's a couple decals that go on there, and there's also a couple of tags we'll show you later. You'll probably notice that these pieces got in the way when you went to put the shroud into the body, and they're clipped out of there at step 19 in order to use the two little strips there as the dividers for the rear windows. So I painted those black, of course, and you just use a little dab of tube glue to set those into position. You may have to trim them first to make sure they're the right length. Those two tabs at the bottom of the shroud there at the rear of the car go into two holes that are in the rearmost portion of the frame. So we're going to add that. We're going to snap that into position now. As you can see, they sit right in there nice. You just kind of move the rear frame in a little bit so that allows the tabs to pop into place. It's a loose fit, but they fit there just right. And that's what, of course, hinges the body onto the frame of the funny car. Well, you've probably noticed a long time ago there were no headers basically added to the engine. Well, that's so that they fit and look proper with the body in position. So we'll add those now. First I drilled out the ends with a pin vise and a drill bit, and I painted them flat white, scraped off the paint where they glue together, and added them to the engine block from underneath. And here you can see the headers sticking out from the sides of the funny car, and she's looking pretty good, finally coming together as a completed unit. Now we can remove that body from the frame there, and we're going to add some of the other pieces that to finish up our construction. You see here, gather the light bar, the spotlights, etc., and tags, and the stand. The spotlights seem to me to be a little tricky to install, so I shortened off the stem and drilled it out and added a little piece of plastic rod so that I could put those into a hole that I put in the car. Now, for the faint of heart, this is a hard one, but you have to start your holes where they go and then use a pin vise to finish that up. And then it's easy to glue the spotlights into place. You see here, the one on the far side has already been added. Now those are just folded down. We don't want any drag to slow down our car, so those are then glued into position. Our light bar is finished, and now we need to mount that to the roof. It goes right in the center, and I use a double-sided tape to mount things like that. It's very sticky. It doesn't really come off and doesn't dry out. So I put it on the ends there where it attaches to the frame that goes on the edges of the roof. And then I just stuck them on and stuck it in place. And there you have it. Now here are the parts that I had left over. There aren't many left, just a few decals that I didn't use, and you could have finagled the bug catcher there to be used with the engine, but those are choices that I made. You don't have to do that. You could use them all. Well, there you have it. Your model is complete, and she looks like she's ready to put some fire down on the track, if not go put them out. So there's a little sticker in the back that says stay behind 1,320 feet. And those tags that go on the chute packs also say remove before flight. So I'm thinking that the driver of this car would be expecting to do some really low flying and get a pretty good exhilaration out of his acceleration. Now, they have breathed new life into this this version of the vehicle. I think they did a great job. I commend Revell for reissuing this unit. It's kind of a blast from the past, only it's got a fresh new look with those nice looking side script decals. So if I were you, I'd buy one and put it on my shelf.